This episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast is brought to you by DeviceTalks Tuesdays, our weekly digital meeting featuring leaders in the medtech industry. Join us on Tuesday, December 8th at 4 p.m. to hear from our friends at ICS. Topic is usability challenges in cutting-edge medical devices and exoskeleton robotics. Go to devicetalks.com to register. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the Device Talks Weekly Podcast. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. We have a delightful treat for you today. We've got Geoff Martha, the CEO of Medtronic. He's on hand to talk a little bit about their quarterly numbers last week, but more about his path into medtech, how he connected with Omar Ishrak, and how he's guiding Medtronic, how he's leading Medtronic into the future. They announced a significant reorg, talked a bit about that, about what that means for companies that want to work with Medtronic, and what it means for employees working in Medtronic. So great conversation, wrapping up with, I think, a real thoughtful discussion about what it means to be leading an institution in this day and age. So stay tuned for that. But first, this would not be a Device Talks Weekly Podcast without a podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, the executive editor of Life Sciences at Mass Device. Chris Newmarker, how are you, sir?
Good to be here, Tom. Hey, how was your holiday weekend?
Great holiday weekend. Looking forward to December. Hard to believe we're in December. And
it's amazing.
What a year it has been. Now, this has been your first full 12 months or so as executive editor, correct?
Yeah, first full year as executive editor. And, it was really nice to start out my first year as executive editor on such a slow year. But not much going on, really had to look for news this year.
I mean, putting all the tragedy aside, and it is considerable. What has the impact been for Mass Device and for medical design and outsourcing?
I mean, it says something that when the pandemic was ramping up, I mean, the page views for our life sciences site skyrocketed up to about 1 million a month.
Wow.
And it's settled down. But yeah, I mean, I think we made a real difference, like providing some crucial information for people about the technologies rolling out. So
early on, I mean, medtech was certainly in the crosshairs of the president, and also when demands for ventilators became high. Certainly, there was a lot of focus on that. But where do you go from here? What does December look like for you? Are you going to go back and identify the stories of the year? I mean, we're certainly going to do that here on the podcast, but what is your process for December?
Yeah, I mean, I think that will be a big thing. I mean, good. Here's a good journalism secret. You notice that journalism sites, when people go on vacation for the holidays, roll out retrospectives of the year. I mean, that's a great evergreen way to end your content for the year. Anyway, it's a good way to look back and kind of take stock of everything. And we're starting that process. We're kind of looking at what our top stories were for the year. But I mean, right at the top, COVID, the response to COVID. I mean, that's the top story of the year. Everything else, is connected to it in some way.
Absolutely. No, it's been an extraordinary year for me as well. I mean, I joined last November, so not quite what I signed up for. I signed up to do the in-person events, and we will be doing one, we hope, and it's looking more likely, I think, October 4th and 5th.
Yeah.
Device Talks Boston next year. So that's exciting to plan for, and we'll have more details on that. But as for the podcast,
we're recording this podcast on Wednesday, and just today, the UK approved Pfizer's vaccine. So here we go. And, we're going to have, the odds look good that when the FDA advisory committee meets on, December 10th, they'll approve the same vaccine as well. Or, I mean, they'll recommend it, and FDA will get that authorization out. And we'll start getting a vaccine out.
That'll be great news. So this month we're going to have podcasts up. I think our final one will probably be the week before Christmas. So hope folks will subscribe and stay tuned. We've got some great interviews coming up this month. But before we look too far ahead at December, let's look back just a little bit over the past week and a half. It's time for
the Newmarkers Newsmakers.
All right, that is taken from Medtronic, courtesy of Medtronic. That's the drum roll they've been playing on their their quarterly calls. Pretty jazzy, right?
I like it. It's good. Yeah, I kind of got like a drum bugle corps thing going on.
So we're going back a week and a half because we didn't put anything out last Friday. So let's get into the number 5 Newmarker's Newsmaker.
Well, number 5 on the list actually goes really well with our main interview today, which is analysts were really happy with Medtronic's Q2 results. I mean, they beat the street. It looks like they're on track for, growth to kind of normalize in coming months, but kind of the big thing was they had analysts at Jefferies, they're commenting on, what they described as the new tone under, CEO Geoff Martha, that there's a lot more, it's a lot more competitive, a lot more talking about share taking and bold moves. Tom, we should really get Geoff Martha on this podcast sometime, I think.
I think I'll work on that, Chris. I'll just wait another 6 to 7 minutes and we'll have him on here.
Oh, wow. That was fast. That's great. All right. Great. All right. So there we go. So so that was number 5 on the list. Number 4 on the list, we had, the Victorious Medical Technologies. The FDA granted a breakthrough device designation for their left atrial pressure monitoring device, and this system. Let me see if I can pronounce it correct. The VLAP. They're touting it as it's the first digital wireless battery-free device, and it can communicate from deep within the body using high-resolution waveform morphology. But this could be a really good new tool to help with heart failure management. So really interesting device, really cool device. So.
That's great. Yeah, number 4, and you'll get into number 3 right now. Both bringing some really excellent tech into
yeah.
medtech.
I mean, number 3 was GE Healthcare, touting use of artificial intelligence to help with the placement of breathing tubes for COVID-19 patients. And just a week or two ago, we posted an article off a New York Times story that was kind of commenting on how, we've got all these medical device companies that cranked out all these ventilators, when the pandemic started. And, now the problem is we've got a shortage of healthcare workers who can, properly, operate them. You can't just hook somebody up with severe COVID-19 to a ventilator and just flip a switch. I mean, and you really need a lot of adjustments, with placement, with, all kinds of stuff. So, so to hear that, GE is bringing AI to bear to, at least help with the placement of, the tubes. I mean, that could make a difference. I mean, especially right now as we, head into this dark winter with this huge COVID wave. And
if you follow Twitter at all, there are some very tired healthcare professionals out there.
Yeah.
Who have not stopped.
So any way you can make it easier for them it would be really good. So this is good news article.
Absolutely. Many thanks to those folks out there. If any of them are listening, thank you for all you're doing. So
yeah, absolutely.
Number 2, Chris Newmark.
Now, number 2 on the list. It's this story should be familiar to you, Tom. This is your story. This is something you actually read off of our last podcast when you had Spencer Stiles on. And Spencer's the group president of Stryker's orthopedic and spine groups. But here you tell people about this.
I will happily pick up that baton, Chris. Yeah, no, it was a great conversation, and it's amazing how this, I guess, would be considered lower tech than what we've been talking about previously, given the fact that, ortho implants, we're talking about hips, we're talking about knees. Spencer's point on the podcast, for those who didn't catch it, was that I had asked him about the rise of remote technologies to connect medical sales reps to the OR. His point was that they had tried that, but he's finding the demand for sales reps is actually higher now because what we were talking about just a moment ago, the shortage of healthcare professionals to help with prepping a patient, with prepping the OR, with getting the right implants, with making sure everything is in place for the surgeon. There's a dearth of those folks. So you need the sales reps now, at least in ortho, more than you ever did. So it was a real counterpoint to a lot of the discussions we've had on the podcast and on our other channels, including DeviceTalks Tuesdays. And it's actually gotten a lot of back and forth, interesting conversation on LinkedIn. So
cool.
And number 1 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers list.
Number 1 on the list is we got another medtech company going public. It's Butterfly Network. They had a definitive business combination agreement with Longview Acquisition. So this is interesting. This is like a handheld medical imaging tech that they have called the Butterfly IQ system. And I just think I suspect this. I mean, this got thousands of hits on mass device.
Yeah, well, the specialty purpose acquisition companies are certainly big stories, and interesting that that one found a medtech company to take public. So that'll certainly be one to watch. Excellent. Well, that's a great list. Well, now let's get into our keynote conversation. Chris, you asked for it. You're getting it. He is Geoff Martha, the CEO of Medtronic. Before we get into this keynote conversation with Geoff Martha, the CEO of Medtronic, we're going to hear from our good friends at Delve. President Dave Franchino visits with us once again in this week's 2-Minute Detox. In this segment, Dave Franchino explains how COVID-19 has impacted innovation. Let's listen.
I have a colleague who has been saying, if you can't find a problem to solve during a pandemic, you're not looking very hard. And I think that's a really interesting thought when you think in terms of the perspective a lot of companies need to take on revisiting their plans for innovation. The reality is that the pandemic has changed the landscape for product needs and product opportunities a great deal. There are different modalities in terms of the way that products are being delivered, different challenges. Some products are being rendered obsolete. Other products are becoming kind of more in focus. And so I think one of the techniques that companies would really benefit in using is taking a very critical look at their current product offering and trying to understand how the pandemic and tendencies that will survive beyond the pandemic might impact their thoughts and their plans. Obviously, hopefully, some of the aspects of the pandemic will pass and we will return to what might be a more typical or normal state. But there's also fundamental aspects that are going to change and will remain changed, to different focuses on social distancing, on telemedicine. And all of those, I think, create opportunities for products. Then maybe the second perspective that companies have taken is, I think what I might call is more of a business as usual perspective, which is in no way to sort of put your head in the sand relative to the impact of the pandemic, but to recognize that innovation is the lifeblood of all companies, recognize that we'll continue to live in a very competitive space, and driving forward with innovation needs to continue apace in order to remain relevant in the world as it evolves. And so I think balancing those two perspectives, let's take a critical look at the current products and services we're providing, understand how they might need to change to reflect emerging realities in life today, and then how do we not lose our focus in driving forward on innovation, because we know that's the future lifeblood of our communities. So those are two broad strategies, I think, that have worked very effectively.
Thanks, Delve and President Dave Franchino, for sharing your thoughts on this week's 2-Minute Detox. For more information about Delve, go to delve.com. If you'd like your story told through the 2-Minute Detox channel, please reach out to me. My email is tsalemi, Tsalemi, at WTWHmedia.com, and I'll put you in touch with the right folks. Now, let us hear from Geoff Martha, the CEO of Medtronic. Well, Geoff Martha, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So you've got a lot to talk about. You had your quarterly numbers this morning, or I should say at this point last week. But first, I always like to just find out a little bit about how folks find their way into medtech. You started right out of Penn State, right? That was your start?
Right. That was a GE, but my first 15 years, I was at GE for 20 years. The first 15 were actually in financial services, GE Capital. So totally unrelated to healthcare. And it gotten to the point where this is actually an interesting story. I got to the point where I just got a little, I think it wasn't being fulfilled. I wanted to do something with a little more societal impact. And we were living in the Chicago area. My wife said, look, we'd already moved like 10 times. We had young kids. And she's like, look, if you want to, why don't you look at GE Healthcare, which is in Milwaukee. I'm like, well, that's a long way. She says, well, you can drive, we're not moving. It was a 75-mile drive each way. And anyway, long story short, I did that. I found myself sitting outside of Omar Ishrak's office, and I was going to interview to be his head of M&A. And I was feeling pretty good about the interview until I heard him in there talking, and he was talking a lot of clinical terms. And all of a sudden I got nervous. I mean, what do I have in common with this guy? So I basically went in there and said, look, I don't know anything about healthcare, but I don't think you do very well at M&A, and I'll help you do M&A if you teach me healthcare. And that's how I got into healthcare.
That's excellent. Now, I was going to ask specifically about that. So you did not know Omar prior to taking that job?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So 4 years later, you and he went to leave Medtronic. I'd love to know what What was that conversation like for you? I mean, that is, you're going from a deep pool into an even deeper pool. You're all medtech. You're going to have to learn everything. What was that conversation like, and what caused you to make that move to Medtronic?
For the first conversation, I'll never forget, it was Omar telling me he was leaving GE, and I was really surprised by this. I was at Starbucks in the Milwaukee area on a Saturday morning. He gave me the news, and I was really disappointed. I was happy for him. I really had a lot of faith in him and his vision, and I knew what he could do on a bigger stage like Medtronic. I was sad for GE and myself at that time. He was obviously a real mentor of mine and friend, and not that the friendship would end, but it would be a little different. And I was really happy to hear, about a month later, he called me from it was during his first week at Medtronic, and said, look, I could really use your help. And, it was a big decision for me. I was 20 years at GE at that point and had just gotten a promotion and was feeling pretty good about things. And this was before, some of the problems that are now plaguing GE really were starting to surface. And, I thought I'd be a GE lifer. So it was a big move. But the more I researched Medtronic and medtech, the more intrigued I came and realize in medtech, you're that much closer to the patient than you are with in the imaging world, like we were in GE. And then I read about the Medtronic mission, and Omar told me about it. And I started to meet some of the other executives at Medtronic, and I was sold. I told my wife, we really got to do this. And she goes, well, then who's telling our daughter, Emily, who was 12 at the time? And that was the most difficult decision, was facing my 12-year-old daughter, who was really happy in Milwaukee at that time.
Oh my goodness. No, that's a tough one to have. So you went to Medtronic. Was the idea that he needed your help in acquiring and building the company, because you become a big part of the Covidien acquisition a few years later? Was there a plan in place that we need to get bigger, we need to become deeper and broader? I
think no. Initially, it really was. We, look, man, doing M&A is a core strength of Medtronic's, and we had a guy running M&A at that time who ended up reporting into me in my role was head of M&A and strategy. But really what my first couple of years here was really working with Omar and the rest of the senior leadership team to frame his strategy and framing the strategy of the company, what we were going to do differently. And really, how do you take that strategy, that vision, turn it into a strategy, and then turn it into some specific work streams and action, and make sure that the whole company's bought into it. So working with Omar and the rest of the leadership to pull together that strategy and then drive it across the company. That's where I spent most of my time. I did a lot of M&A work, but I think most of my time was on the strategy until Covidien. And then once Covidien happened, it was that was all in for, like a year and a half of work on that.
Curious, do you still feel or sense the contrast between life outside a medtech company and in a medtech company? Do you still have that appreciation of the differences, whatever they are?
I do. It's what we're doing at Medtronic and other medtech companies, this whole market, this market creation of taking an idea, first of all, working with physicians to identify an unmet need in healthcare, like a crazy idea. Hey, we can deliver this heart valve through a catheter. Let's try that. I don't know who thought that up, but then somebody thinks that up, and then we go to work, our engineers go to work to make that happen. And then we start doing some clinical work on, and then to prove safety, and then eventually efficacy. Then you're working with the reimbursement agencies and payers and governments around the world, and then you push it out to your field force to make a global standard of care. That magic is very unique to medtech, and I would argue that Medtronic has been the leader in that area for medtech, and it is just something that is awe-inspiring to be a part of, and it really is motivating.
Let's just review a little bit at your quarterly numbers this morning. I think most keenly, it was a strong showing. How would you characterize this quarter to last, given that we're living still in this COVID world, hopefully for only a few months longer? The
recovery continues to be faster than people anticipated. Mm-hmm. Certainly, we anticipated. And look, I credit the the hospitals, the executive teams and the physicians and the healthcare workers at the hospitals have really, there's no way to describe it. It's innovation and just a resolute commitment to patients. I mean, they innovated the way they work. And you see it in our space, like in the cardiac rhythm space, where we have pacemakers and implantable defibrillators and insertable monitoring devices. This is a space that has really moved to more of a remote space now. What I mean by that is the physician conducts a procedure to implant the pacemaker. But with remote Bluetooth technology now, the Medtronic rep can program that pacemaker at the time of the procedure. We can program that from outside the room. When a patient who has a pacemaker needs to come in for their quarterly checkup to make sure the pacemaker is working okay, that they don't need to do that anymore. We can do that, remotely, because that pacemaker now is plugged into the cloud, and we can remotely diagnose is the pacemaker working the way it's supposed to. When that patient might need to go to the emergency room, the way it's worked historically is no hospital will touch that patient until Medtronic has come in to check to make sure the pacemaker is working properly. Then they can attend to their, let's say, broken ankle or whatever. That now is done remotely. All of that technology was there pre-COVID, but it really hadn't taken off. And now the hospitals have rallied around that and really saved a lot of foot traffic in the hospital, both from Medtronic, industry people, from patients having to come back. So things like that, there's examples galore like that where hospitals have just innovated using technology to, speed up this recovery and allow patients to, resume to, elective procedures.
And you were quoted and you said that when asked when things are going to go back to normal, I think this was at AdvaMed, you said, I don't want to go back to normal.
Right.
Go to the new normal, which I thought was great. What are you happy to be sort of leaving behind? It sounds like that would be one example of that, but are there other parts of the medtech industry that maybe this pandemic, which is a horrible thing, has at least forced us to kind of grow out of?
For us, this is more of a Medtronic, and maybe other companies feel the same. And I think they do, as I've talked to other companies, not just in medtech, but other executives at companies across around the world. The idea that the pandemic forced us to, for us in particular with the ventilator work that we were doing, to just innovate quickly, because literally lives were on the line and it felt like every minute counted. Mm-hmm. And we need to figure out a way to dramatically ramp our production of these ventilators and at the same time improve the functionality. Physicians were asking us to be able to remotely control these ventilators so they didn't have to enter the ICU with all these sick COVID patients all the time to monitor patients. Can you monitor them remotely? Can you change the settings remotely? There's all kinds of, can you put two patients on one ventilator, all kinds of requests for innovation. And I think, the story, we really stepped up and innovated quickly. And what I learned was look, when we focus, first of all, I learned because we put a SWAT team on this that included myself, my predecessor, Omar, a lot of executives in our ventilator business and across our cross-functional team. We cut through so much bureaucracy and, levels in the organization melted away, silos melted away. And with this focus, we were able to do a lot of things really quickly. But in doing all this, I realized how much bureaucracy that we needed to cut through. And so what I don't want to go back to is that kind of environment where there's too many approvals needed to get something done, too many layers in the organization. And in many ways, a lack of focus where we're trying to do everything. And in the end, we don't do anything, right? And so a company with the resources like Medtronic, we can do almost anything, but we just can't do everything. So picking your spots and focusing is a big one. And then changing the organizational structure. We've delayered the organization, decentralized the organization, and really trying to drive this innovative, this renewed sense of urgency in innovation that is really exciting. So there's a lot of energy here, and I don't want to go back to where we were pre-COVID from that regard.
How much of this reorganization reflects the lessons you learned from that strike team responding to COVID? Or was this the plan anyway, and it just happens to be coincidentally timed after this pandemic?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I remember in January at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, I wasn't CEO yet, but I was president of the company, and the succession was clear that I would take over in April. And I was telling investors that we really, and not just me, but the rest of the executive team, we talked about going from one $30 billion company to $31 billion companies and allowing our businesses, which really are defined by They're focused around a set of very specific conditions, like whether it be cardiac arrhythmias or AFib or back surgery, back pain. They're very focused, and they're focused on a set of specialist physicians, and they're defined really by the cadence of their innovation. That is the key. And so by decentralizing and making them smaller, it wasn't about the size, it was more about the focus. That we thought could speed up the pace of innovation. And when we got into the COVID pandemic and the ventilator crisis, and we saw firsthand what it was like, I saw firsthand what it was like to get little things done, like a change of a different supplier to a product and all the bureaucracy that went with it. It really inspired, I'd say, being more aggressive with this, moving faster and probably broader than we otherwise would have on this movement. But the whole idea of this $31 billion business has started pre-COVID, but really accelerated during the pandemic.
Let's talk about how they're going to work. I mean, you did a great job laying it out on the Analyst Day. You did a wonderful job with the AV. The slides are great. I think the video stuff is just, I wish everybody did it that way. How do you see these companies existing by themselves? So people listening to this, they own smaller companies, they want to do business, right, these verticals. What is that engagement going to look like? It's great to say they're going to have all this autonomy and they're going to be able to make decisions on their own, but what will that really look like?
Right. It's a great question. I mean, the key benefit here is by unnesting these businesses, we want to make sure there's clear line of sight to that end market, what those patients and those physicians need in that end market. And also, quite frankly, what's the competitive dynamic? Who are your competitors? And I want to know at a very granular level, what is their product cadence? Because as we're making trade-offs across the business, we may accelerate a particular a product because we see a competitor coming at us and we don't want to cede that kind of share. So the transparency it provides is great. And so you're getting back to your question. Now that we have that transparency, we're setting a level of expectation that I want you to grow at or above the market. And what's it going to take? And so we're getting some very specific feedback from these businesses on what they're going to need from a funding, whether it be R&D or maybe acquisitions, with the goal of growing at or above the market. And in some cases, some of our businesses have the opportunity to completely redefine the market. And we'll make a few of those bets as well. And so the idea is, look, we're going to have less distractions. You're not going to, you own the P&L in these businesses. You pull the levers. We really cut out a lot of meetings that we had these people coming to that really weren't tied to their end of their end markets and their business that they were running. We really put back the P&L. Our P&L, after COVIDian, Medtronic moved to this fairly rigid matrix, that had three legs. You had the businesses, you had the regions and the functions. We collapsed that matrix back in under the businesses for the most part. And so we put Humpty Dumpty back together again, the business, the P&L, they all have their own sales forces. And so they have all the levers to pull, but with that comes accountability. And there's an expectation to grow at or above your market in a consistent fashion. So with that kind of empowerment comes accountability. And now there are certain things, there are limits, and there are certain things where we've said, look, you've got all this empowerment, but for this short list of things, right? It used to be the other way around. Well, there's this long list of things that you had to go to the mothership for. Now it's a short list. And that list is things like manufacturing footprint. Look, we don't think every little business needs to have their own plant. We've got a network of plants. Use that. If you don't like it, or if there's some reason, you can go use a contract manufacturer. When they do it, I'd like to understand why, because maybe we're missing something in our existing operational footprint. But we think we can control quality better in our manufacturing the way when it's coordinated more from an enterprise basis, and we can keep costs down. It's not just the factories, but also our distribution network, how we move product around the world. So that's one thing that's more enterprise controlled, but still the decisions are made by the business. If they don't like it, they can, just like a startup, they can go to a contract manufacturer. Most of these startups in medtech don't start with their own factory. They use contract manufacturing. So we let our businesses do that.
Sure.
Another thing that would be controlled more by the enterprise would be strategic customers. So if a customer like, Cleveland Clinic wants to cut a deal across Medtronic, we're giving them a regional point of contact, a strategic account manager that can cut that kind of a deal. He or she may, to do that contract, may make trade-offs on pricing from one business to the next in order to benefit the larger Medtronic. And the businesses, we're telling them that you got to go along with that pricing. Now, we look at that every quarter to make sure we're not harming a particular business. But there's a short list. It's the strategic customers, it's the manufacturing, and those are the two big ones. And again, the other area that's not being controlled by the enterprise, but it's being offered up, is certain technology platforms like robotics. We'll have a robotic center of excellence, and we have several businesses that have robots, and they have the option to pool robotics technology from these centers of excellence, but they don't have to. So we're making it more of an opt-in with very few exceptions, like I said, strategic customer pricing and manufacturing.
So it sounds like if I'm a smaller entity, the point person will exist within one of those 20 businesses. There may be some conversations with others higher up, but really your primary person is going to be in that smaller business. You mentioned, and I didn't keep count, but competition is a big word of yours, and I enjoy following you on social media. You had a video of Carol Lawson from Duke talking about competition versus hard work. What does competition mean to you, and what should it mean to Medtronic employees? You can clearly see it in your team, your executive team, how they can measure their success in competition. Salespeople for sure, but when you get down to engineers or people running trials, how should they interpret that competitive nature or spirit that you're definitely trying to instill?
Well, first, the biggest point I want to make is the why behind the competitiveness. Why is this so important for Medtronic? We're a mission-driven company. We talk about putting patients first. We talk about creating new healthcare markets. The why is important because the markets that we play in have gotten so much more competitive over the years. As you know, Tom, a startup has relatively easy access to capital. They can innovate a device I tell our employees, there's a engineer and his dog in some garage somewhere with an idea that could disrupt one of our big businesses. And we need to understand that. And then you've got competition coming from from China now. I mean, it's very competitive. And if we want to carry out our mission, which is to create these new wonderful therapies and globalize them. Once we do that, we've got to be able to hold on to our share. We create new markets, and then historically we've let competition come in behind us and take big chunks of that market too quickly. And we don't get the full financial return that we need for our shareholders and for ourselves to keep funding it. So the market share is a source of fuel that fuels our invention and market development, which is really the mission-driven nature of Medtronic. And so you have to make that connection. And so it's super important because this innovation doesn't come free, right? It's clinical innovation, technical innovation is very expensive. And so we have to do a better job at holding on to this share. And this is not just about sales. This is about everybody in the company. You mentioned engineers. So the best way to hold on to your market share is to innovate. Right? If we're constantly innovating, then that's a good way. Let me give you an example. In the cardiac rhythm space, there's a cardiac insertable. It's not implanted. It's like inserted just below the skin. A product that we call Link, and it monitors cardiac arrhythmias. It monitors AFib that could cause stroke, and it's something that has like our new Link 2 device has like a 4.5-5 year battery life, and it's low energy Bluetooth, so we see all this data in the cloud and can do all kinds of analytics. And we created that market, and it's been wonderful for patients. It's been wonderful for us, and it's now like $700 million, $800 million business for us. And now we've got Abbott came into the market, and Boston Scientific just recently came into the market. But despite that, we have held our over 80% share because we're constantly innovating. We're on our 4th generation device. They're coming out with their 1st generation device. It doesn't effectively compete. In the past, in businesses that I actually took over, that wasn't the case. New competition came in, and our 100% share position went down to like 30% because we're like, well, there's 3 of us. Let's split it 1, 2, 3. Well, no, that's not the way. That's not the way it's supposed to work. We got to hold on to that share, and that economics is what's funding other parts of our business. Things like renal denervation that'll be one of the biggest things to happen in public health in a long time. Things like the soft tissue robot, they cost money, These other businesses need to be more competitive, hold on to their share to help fund the fuel for our mission.
Do you see these businesses competing with each other?
Not really, no. We talk about that. I mean, look, it's such a mission-driven company. When I started talking about competitiveness, it's interesting you picked up on this. One question was, well, can you still be competitive and be mission-driven? And I'm like, I went through that whole explanation I just gave you. Yes and yes. And then they say, well, is that going to drive internal competition? And I talked about this with our leadership team, our top 200 leaders just last week. And I'm okay with a little friendly competition inside the company. But we don't have overlapping markets where we're competing. We don't want to be competing in front of the customer. But I think it's okay for businesses within Medtronic to strive to be the higher growth businesses or the ones that produce the most cash flow. I mean, we need the whole package to work together. We have some businesses that are like rocket ships that are growing really fast and throw off less cash. We have others that are like, there's a minimum level of growth that we need, but they more mid-single digit growth, but throwing off much more cash that we can reinvest in innovation and M&A. Everybody has their role. And we have like a friendly, we call them the Peak Performance Awards for which businesses is winning these different awards of growth or new product launches. That type of friendly competition is good. But, what I really want to drive is these businesses, sharing best practices, sharing technology platforms across, which will make Medtronic better. And that's kind of the culture that we're trying to drive is ultra competitiveness outside the company, right? With, in a very appropriate way. I mean, because we're all in healthcare together. And then inside the company, a little bit of a friendly competition, but we are starting to build these technology development centers where the businesses are sharing technology platforms. It makes everybody better. It makes our innovation faster, more efficient, and higher quality.
I know we only have a few more minutes. So the last thing I want to hit upon was I listened to the Analyst Day yesterday. I watched it again. In that, you mentioned the decline in trust in governments and institutions. And it was in October. Here we are a month later, November. Yeah. That dynamic seems to have gotten worse in many ways. How do you, as a leader of an institution, how are you going to address it? How do you view that problem and what can you and Medtronic do about it?
Well, look, I do think large organizations like Medtronic need to play a bigger role in society than maybe we have in the past. I remember in the 70s, there was a famous Harvard case study or whatever that said companies are supposed to just, they're built for profit, follow the rules and maximize your profit. I think that dynamic today has changed and society's changed. The fact that we're an innovation company, and innovation is still a people game. We need to have the best and brightest people working at Medtronic. And that's the most important thing. Yet the best and brightest people today want to work for a company that stands for something. And I see this like in some countries like China. I saw it years ago where, employees are attracted. There's not as the same dynamic as the United States where there's churches and college allegiances and all these other affinity groups outside. They look to the company as a source of pride and affinity. And that's happening in other parts of the world too, like the United States. I mean, people want to work for companies that stand for something now, and they want it to drive societal change. And so we're not going to try to solve all the world's problems, but we're being in the healthcare business, that helps a lot. You're in a business that people like because you're helping people, but also some of these society issues that we're seeing around the racial strife and inequality. These are something that's right in our mission, written 60 years ago by our founder, Earl Bach. And, we have a number of tenets in the mission that specifically address an inclusive and equitable environment for employees and being a good citizen in the communities that we operate. So reaching out beyond the four walls of Medtronic and making a difference. And so I do think this is something that, one, it's our employees want to do it. And two, it's strategically important for Medtronic because it is a huge recruiting and retention tool. We need the best people. They want to work at a company like this. And so it all works. Is it harder to, in this culture where we seem to be more divisive, is that becoming a challenge for leaders like yourself? Maybe not Medtronic specifically, but with just different feelings and strong leanings. Yeah, it is. It is. We've got 90,000 people and about half of those are, maybe not half, maybe 30,000 or so in the United States. And obviously there are people that are on the left and on the right. When you have a cohort of employees that big, it's gonna reflect what we're seeing in society. And I'll use the United States as an example. And I do get emails from employees that are way more left leaning or way more right leaning, and maybe really excited or offended by something that we did as a company or I said personally in a public forum. But so you've got to pick something on these social issues. Got, I'd say, two that are first and foremost for us. That are, one is just the access to healthcare. We're a healthcare company, and as we speak, I think we're working with a number of other hospital systems and payers and other medtech and pharma companies to address health inequities around the world. And more on that I hope to be able to talk to in the next couple of months. But the other is inclusion and diversity, and that is like I said, it's right in our mission. And there was a huge authentic commitment at Medtronic, and these topics are controversial, but it's one that I personally and the company's leadership have decided to really lean into. And this goes back to my predecessor Omar, who I know you've talked about on some of your past podcasts. And I saw that you had Art Collins on the other day as well. But, this is something that is really an authentic commitment from the company. And so we're picking our spots. And those are the two big ones: health access and, inclusion, diversity, and equity. And those are the ones that we're really focused on because we want to focus and make a difference.
I know you need to go, but it's funny you mentioned Art because he had mentioned the metric that he had, I think, created.
Yeah.
Followed of touching patients. How many patients? And you referenced that today on the analyst call.
Yeah, no, it was because he sent me the email and he said, "Hey, look, I was on the Device Talks with Tom, and he asked me a question about you, and I just wanted you to know that here it is, just so you know." And so I listened to it, and I didn't know that he was the one that started that metric because it is the most important metric in Medtronic, and I know it predated Omar. It was here when I got here. And when Omar first got here in 2011, it was like one patient every 5 seconds, and now it's 2 patients per second. And listening to your podcast, like last night, I got the email from Art maybe just Monday or Sunday, and then I listened to it last night. That's why it was fresh in my mind. And now I'm starting to think, though, 2 patients every second, as great as that is, it's still only 80 million people. And there's 7.5 billion people in the world. And so there's huge opportunity for us, and technology is the answer here. We're coming out of this pandemic. Healthcare has been highlighted. We've seen the importance of healthcare in this pandemic, right? It's forefront on everybody's mind. And we also have this whole concept of the racial inequities and this whole concept of driving more equitable society. Healthcare is a big part of that. So how are we going to drive more healthcare access, but do it efficiently, right? Because the whole world's taking on all this debt. Healthcare is super expensive. So how are we going to do it? There's only one answer, and that's technology. And here we are, the world's largest technology company in healthcare, in medtech. We've got to be part of this solution. So it's really a very, in my mind, inspiring call to action is for us to step up and play bigger than we've done in the past. And I'd love to see like a number of healthcare companies and other medtech companies to do the same. Although when they do it, we're going to compete like hell against them.
That's a great way to end it. I really appreciate the time. I know you have a busy day, and thanks for being on the podcast.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tom. Really enjoyed it.
All right, and we're back. Lots of great thoughts from Geoff Martha. Great to have him on the program. And he follows us on social media, Chris.
Yeah.
So others should as well. How can they find you there on LinkedIn and Twitter?
I am on LinkedIn, Chris Newmarker, just like a new marker. And you can find me on Twitter as well, at Newmarker. And just always happy to network and talk with people. Actually, really cool kind of feedback I've been getting on LinkedIn recently from people saying they enjoy our podcast.
That's great. That's always great to hear. Yes, never tired of hearing people say they like the podcast. So feel free to be generous with those comments.
Glad people are having fun getting medtech news from from us crazy goofy guys. So thanks.
We got crossover appeal, baby.
That's right.
They can find me on LinkedIn as well. I am Tom Salemi, and on Twitter I am at MedTech Tom. For the final couple of weeks, Chris, I mean, as people connect, or if they're already connected, I suppose any of people have thoughts or inputs on top stories or news of the week.
Absolutely.
Let's hear about it. Yeah, share it.
Yeah, let me know.
Bring it up on LinkedIn. Comment on our post. We'd love to hear your thoughts. It's been a Super interesting year, both in our industry and for us covering the industry and the way we've had to adapt and do things differently to make sure folks get the news and connections. So we'd love to hear how folks on the front lines are coping.
Yeah, I definitely like close with the sentiment that, man, it feels like we've gone through 10 years worth of news this year. So here's to hoping for a peaceful, relaxing 2021. Let's just let the good times roll.
We've only been working together for a year, and I think we're starting to look alike, me and you, Chris Newmarker. We're like that old couple. Yeah.
We got the beards. Both got beards.
Mine's grayer than yours. Excellent, folks. Thanks for joining us in this episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. Don't forget, if you subscribe, you'll receive future podcasts sent directly to your listening device. So please do it. We do have some great interviews coming up in December. You won't want to miss any of them. And do share this podcast on social media. Put us on LinkedIn. Put us on Twitter. And if you do so, tag Chris and myself. We'd love to be part of those conversations. All right, we'll tune in next week. We'll have another great episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast waiting for you.
See you next week.